does that. Um, so we're going to talk about special stipulations and amendment to address concerns today. And when I first started teaching this class, obviously we were in a different market from the standpoint of it wasn't as tight of a seller's market as we have right now, where everybody's trying to keep offers extremely clean to win the bid. But nonetheless, we're not going to be in this forever. So let's kind of talk about um, what we need to do and what type of things need to be done there. So our agenda for today is how to write them, both special stipulations and amendment to address concerns, what to include. Um, Special stipulations, as many of you might know, goes on your purchase and sale agreement. Amendment to concerns is a totally different form that happens after your inspection during the due diligence period. Deanna, can you record? Deanna?
Hey, we're already recording.
Oh,
Yeah,
great.
it's already recording.
Thank you. Um, and then we'll go through some examples of some special stipulations and amendment write-ups. And then who receives a copy of the ATAC, as we like to call it, and then alternative to repair requests. So first up, special stipulations. How many use them in your contracts?
I do.
Are you still using them in this tight market? And which ones are you using?
Well, it depends. Not initially in the offer. I definitely use it at the time of writing the ATAC.
Okay.
And what did you say? How do I use them, or which ones am I using?
Which ones are you using if you're putting them in the contract?
Oh my gosh, that is so tied to every single deal. But termite inspection, or I mean clearance letter, if I had to pick one for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And any repairs that we've discussed already and agreed to, or if they've decided to do cash in lieu of, or I mean closing cost in lieu of something, we just increase the closing cost, but that's not a stipulation. But a stipulation, really whatever we discussed in terms of repairs, specifically what they would do in a home warranty one, if we've agreed to that.
So you're doing that at the front end of the contract writing?
I used to. And so now, not so much, because I need to win the contract first is my goal.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. And that's that we do have to do that and be mindful of that. Oh, sorry, let me adjust my screen here a little bit. Okay, so a couple of things that there are some pre-written stipulations that are available for you from the GAR forms. Why you write them is really you want to protect your client. Include items that to be addressed in that initial contract for your buyer and counter for seller as needed or add clarifications. So, for example, I got one recently where the seller wanted us to guarantee that we would pay the difference from the appraised value to the contracted price because we had gone above list price. Well, it was very vague because one, that would then kind of tie my client to if it appraised lower than their list price, her having to bring all of that monies to the table potentially based on how it was written. So I added a lot of clarification into that, saying that we would only be making that that amount tied to it at least appraising for that list value. If it appraised less than that list value, then we're reverting back to the stipulations into the financing contingency exhibit. They agreed to it. I just didn't want to, it comes in 5,000 under, and then now she has to come up with $10,000 to meet the contract price, but you didn't even meet your list price. Things that you need to make sure you're including is who's going to be completing the work, seller, buyer, agent, if applicable, who's paying or not, and then the timing, if applicable. If you're requesting exhibits, make sure to label them in a special stip and check the applicable box. So if you know there's going to be an HOA and you don't have that document, then the CAD or the Community Association disclosure, then you can request that in special steps. And I don't think that would prohibit you in this type of market to get that, but you want to make sure everybody's on the same page, or the property disclosure as well. I usually will ask for the seller's property disclosure for 24 hours, the CAD within 3 business days, as well as getting those HOA docs and putting that on the seller to provide that, so that your buyer can review that and make sure that those restrictions in that community are going to be something that they can live with. So a lot of times I'll have people who are like, well, I want a fence and this doesn't have a fence. Well, it's important to see those HOA docs in order to make sure that they allow fences, or what are the stipulations in getting a fence. Or I have one now that wants a pool. So is it a swim and tennis community? Do they have an issue with people putting pools in, things of that nature? So you need to know that up front if your client is needing some of those things. So I always request that in special steps and don't leave that, because that kind of contractually ties them to giving us the information. And I've had one situation where they had to pay. So they had to pay the HOA the property management company to get the documents. And had I not put it in there, it kind of could have fell on my buyer versus falling on the seller to make sure they provide that and get that processed. For buyers making requests as needed, if you want furniture, personal items, those are things you can definitely ask for. If you already see things that need to be repaired, especially if there's cosmetic, then you want to bring that up to the attention up front. Like I've seen, and we probably all have seen, where the garage has dents in them. There's a hole in the wall or something, or a dent in the wall. If those are things you want fixed, obviously trying to bring it up at ATAC, they're not really functional problems, if you will, to the house. So that's something you want to bring up front. And I always say, and always do, seller agrees to at no additional cost to the purchaser. I make sure to indicate that, to make sure that we're not my buyer is protected. And I strongly recommend that you number them. So this way there's no confusion into what what things are there. Cause I've seen some when I'm a listing agent where it's kind of, the waters are muddy. They kind of have it running together. And especially now that these contracts have a smaller space for special stipulations on the actual contract, you want to be very clear. With that said, there is an entirely special GAR form, special stipulation form that you can use. So you can use that small space, but if you need more, then you can add it to the other form. And there's a box at the bottom where you check that you have there's additional special stipulations. So I typically, now with these smaller spaces, I will check that box and I will actually add it as an exhibit and put it in the area for exhibits, and check the blank line where it says other and say special stipulations, exhibit A, B, or whatever I'm labeling it. So this way nobody can say they missed it. So I just want us to all be on the same page and nobody has any kind of concerns. So really the goal for the special stipulations prior to this market we're in, the caveat is to be very clear and protect your client. And that goes for the seller too. If there's something that the buyer's agent is putting in there that does not, you feel protect your seller, then you need to add that clarification so that everything is clear, because what's in writing is going to be what they stand. And if there's ambiguity, then that can cause create concerns or issues later on. And I'll stop there. Any questions, comments, concerns?
I do. So
Mhm.
that stipulation about the dollar amount above appraised value. Now, see, I thought I was specific until I just heard the way you wrote it, because I did write it that it will not exceed a certain dollar amount, but I did not consider if it did not appraise for a list price. So see, that's another thing that I just learned in that particular stipulation, how to tighten it up.
Yeah, I would have never thought about that either.
Well, so in full disclosure, I am dealing with Open Door. And let me see if I can find it real quick into my email and I can read you. And I did call Stephen, the broker, for us to tighten it up because I was concerned. And then my buyer ended up getting concerned about it as well when I think she sat down and talked about it. So hold on one second. Let me see if I can find it. But I guess, you know, many of you probably don't know, I used to work in foster care. So I kind of took on that mentality of some of these lawyers and judges having to go in front of them consistently back in the day. Where is her email? But yeah, hers was very vague and I hated it. And my bigger concern was in that situation was actually, you know, how the way it was written, again, ambiguity to me, how it was written, do we still get to come back and come out of it because of the financing contingency exhibit? And that was where that prompted me to kind of get more questions asked. So here's what her original counter was: buyer agrees if appraisal comes in below agreed upon purchase price, buyer will cover the difference up to the agreed upon purchase price. And Stephen and I came up with all parties acknowledge and agree if property appraises for list price 250, and I actually specify the amount or above, buyer agrees to bring cash to close to cover difference between appraised value and contracted purchase price. If property fails to appraise for at least list price of 250, the terms of the appraisal contingency in the conventional loan exhibit A will prevail.
That's beautiful.
So this way,
Heck yeah, I like that.
so this way there's no ambiguity. I put the amount in there so that we all know where it was, because you know some people can go in and change the
MLS listing.
the MLS and stuff, even though you can go back and see the history. I didn't want that ambiguity. So we all agreed upon it. So we were good, because our thought process was like, what if it came in at 240? So now we got to pay $15,000 plus her down payment plus closing, you know, plus closing costs. We're not doing that. You got to at least, you know, if you're so confident that your list price is going to be what it appraises for and not a dime over, then that's fine. But we're not going to take on that gap if it doesn't.
Hey, Denise, is it possible that you can send out, you know, that in the email or in the chat or anything so we can
So I do have a handout that I need to clean up a little bit. And what I'll do is hopefully they have taken notes on everybody who's here. So once I clean it up, I'll add this one to my special step doc, and we'll send that out. So I have some common ones that I typically use. And I probably, I need to clean it up. Because there's probably some new ones that I add in there now because of the market that we're in that I don't have on that doc. I got to think about it. So I apologize because I kind of forgot about, I was teaching this class today, so I didn't clean it up beforehand. So that's
no
fine.
worries. Yeah, because I actually want to put an offer in today, and I think I might want to use that. So it's like,
okay, well, who's that? Francis?
Yeah.
I think I have your number. I'll copy and paste it and text you. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Until I get that out. Okay. Any more questions, concerns, comments?
I do.
Sure.
So in the closing I had recently, the buyer and seller agreed the seller would pay for the home warranty, and it was in the ATAC. And I don't know if we've gotten to this, but can you talk about whether or not to add the ATAC to what the closing attorney sees? So for example, it didn't show up as a seller cost because I didn't give it to the closing attorney, meaning the ATAC.
And you took my class the last time, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you're jumping a little ahead, but I will go ahead and address that. So when I took the class the last time, we did have some veterans in the class that said that they do not give the ATAC to the lender or the attorney. So they, I guess this is not supposed to be how it's done, but this is what they do. They do not letter it or number it, so it kind of sits there in ambiguity unless you have to pull it out. So the question really is around, she put it in the ATAC. So now nobody had it in terms of the lender or the attorney to make sure that they got part of the closing. So what I did because of that tidbit that was shared during my last class for Londa Shea, what I did was I had something similar happen where my seller client was offering a home warranty and a termite letter, clear termite letter to the buyer to address some of their concerns. So what we did was I actually put all the repairs in the ATAC, and then I created a separate amendment to the agreement and put those things in there. And then this way that would go to the appropriate parties to know of that. So that's what I did.
Okay,
And
thank
to be
you.
honest with you, that situation, let me add, that situation kind of came back to bite me from the standpoint of the buyer actually missed due diligence, literally missed due diligence. And I had sent both amendments over so they could literally sign off on getting those two things that I had separated, although they had missed due diligence. So there was no way for me to really retract that versus with the ATAC, I could clearly say, you missed due diligence, you can't sign that. That's no longer valid. That's no longer on the table. But we got through it. But yeah, the buyer had missed due diligence. And sadly enough, the buyer was the broker. She was an associate broker. Well, no, she was the broker. And she was also the buyer. So she missed her own due diligence. I don't know
So
how
what
that
happened?
She didn't sign that ATAC. We weren't taking it anyway. Due diligence was expired. Due diligence had expired a good day, and due diligence technically expired 6 o'clock that Monday, and she called me 11 o'clock on Tuesday morning. So
I just had a similar situation like that too, where the agent, well, they missed the due diligence, but when she sent me the ATAC, it said something about roof repairs. And I'm like, they're not doing any roof repairs, but she had already missed due diligence. And so, and I didn't want to send that, even if we had signed off or agreed to that, we didn't want to send that to the lender and stuff, because then it triggers them to say, wait a minute, roof repairs, what the heck is going on? So we ended up offering them a home warranty. And so we just did an amendment for just the home warranty and never did, and then sent that to everybody just because of the funds needed to be make sure that it was taken care of at closing. But we would have never sent over something with the roof repairs on, because then it alerts everybody that until you come to a complete agreement on what is going to actually be completed on the amendment, I don't send it over.
Yeah, now I will say that there was, I can't remember who it was, but I did have a buyer, and it might have been a corporate buyer that I thought was not going to do what they need. Oh, I know it was Zillow. And I felt like, to make sure that they had to stick with what they were doing, I did send the ATAC out. So to everybody. So this way it became part of the contract, because I wasn't confident that they were going to do what they needed to do and do it, that we were going to be totally acceptable to. I just did. I just had my concerns, and so I did make that part of it in that case. So I think you have to make a judgment call, knowing who you're, if you have any assessment of the other side and how you feel about that. If you have any red flags kind of going up, then you might want to keep it as part of the contract. Be careful about sending the actual home inspection, because then that can alert the lender to stuff that you are not necessarily concerns, but could stop your project going on. So
yeah, I never send my inspection to anybody other than the buyer and the seller. Like, I don't send that to the lenders or nobody, because they will look into it and
yeah, because
want other stuff done.
I have a lender now that my client is relocating from from the DC area, and she's working with a client, a lender that's in that market, but he has offices here, so he's collaborating. And one of the things he said to me when we initially spoke is that, yeah, we need a copy of the home inspection to close the deal. And I said, why? You know, I questioned it immediately. He's like, well, we need that up here. I was like, well, we don't do that down here. You know, like we don't do that. He's like, well, a lot of properties up here. I was like, well, we don't have that problem. So I'm pushing back on that as much as possible, because some of the things that they're doing obviously in that market based on experiences in that market doesn't necessarily apply to this market, and can create, you know, issues that wouldn't necessarily be an issue. And I'm dealing with a corporate seller who already doesn't usually want to do much, right? So then that can impact my client of spending all this money, and we now have to start all over if they mess up the deal because they saw the home inspection. So that's what's in the back of my mind with that. Any other questions, concerns? If not, I have some examples I can share.
Yes, Ms. Denise, what is ATAC? I'm sorry. I tried to look it up on my own. Yeah, what is that?
Oh, we just shortened it, amendment to address concerns.
Okay, thank you.
And that's actually after you go under contract. So we're going to get to that. The special stipulations are what you put in the contract as you're negotiating and getting offers and stuff like that. So
are you still using any of the COVID stipulations?
I do.
Have you? You do?
I do. Because COVID is still out here. People can still get COVID, and it can still impact you. And you might not be able to close. People are still, you know, unfortunately not surviving. So at the end of the day, it's a reality. So I put it in there. Let them push back if they want to, but that protects everybody. It's not just, doesn't protect only my buyer, it protects the seller too, because the seller is subjected to it, right? Nobody's immune from getting it. So it's not like the seller can't get it. Matter of fact, I had one, and so with that, I'm glad you brought that up, because I had one where I closed. We found out that basically the seller's family got COVID, and they wanted to exercise. We found out that like right before closing, he wanted to exercise it. And when I reread it, he wouldn't have been able to exercise it. And the problem is that why it impacted him is because all of his family was supposed to help him move. So he was totally behind on getting the moving process completed. And so his sister and I think brother-in-law got it, and they were supposed to be instrumental in that moving process. But when I reread it, he couldn't have exercised it at all. Because it doesn't apply to those people. It applies to everybody involved in the transaction, and they're not involved in the transaction. I never talked to Stephen about it, but I could, just to, you know, clarify that. But I'm 99% sure he wouldn't have been able to exercise it because it wasn't a lender. It wasn't, you know, me or the other agent, stuff like that. And actually, we don't have to, you know, really be there, right? So it takes us out, but it wasn't the buyers or the sellers.
Jay is asking what the COVID stipulations are.
They should be on the GREC website. I have one that's condensed, and I don't remember where I got it from, but I use that one too.
I have to copy and paste mine from one of my old.
And I know the email. There's an email that came out last year. Deanna, can you guys pull that out or get if there's a revised one? Because I got a revised one from somebody else that's a little shorter. But we can get that to you. Let me jot that down. COVID.
Nyla said they're in FMLS.
Oh, they are? Cool. Nyla, is there a link? Can you pull that up, please, if you can? Grab it for us.
Let's see.
All right, so let's take a look at some examples here. So there's no property disclosure available because obviously it's an investor or something. Then I tend to put in all appliances, light fixtures, window coverings, their time is showing are included at no additional cost. So that kind of protects that, you know, they recognize that you saw everything in there and you're wanting it, right? This one I use a lot around the holidays in terms of like due diligence and financing and all of that. So I put a special stip in here that all parties agree that earnest money due date, due diligence, and financial appraising contingencies exclude Thanksgiving holidays, and I specify the dates. And I've actually changed that to include the weekend after for Thanksgiving. I do it again for Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day. I don't think I've had any pushback. If I did, it was just one. So I haven't really had any pushback on it. So it, most people aren't working anyway. So, why subject yourself to the stress and angst of you can't get anything done during that time, and it's counting against your buyer. The other one I'm using a lot now too is seller agrees to transfer any and all pest termite, because if they already have it in place, then we want to transfer it and we don't want to pay for it. The amount for the home warranty, I usually put that, and I usually put buyer's agent to initiate, because I'm not going to leave the seller to find the least expensive option that might not cover much and not protect my buyer. Plus, there was one I think that I had as a listing agent, and the agent texted me and said, "Did you guys do the buyer?" Because she didn't have any specifications. So it goes back to, what I said earlier. Make sure you're saying who, what, where, when, why, kind of thing, right? So this way, there's no ambiguity as to, I feel like it's your buyer, you do it. I can do it too. I'm going to save my client money, so I'm probably not going to get the most expensive thing. But if you do it, you're protecting your person. So you want to get the best possible plan for your buyer if you're the agent. And of course, the seller's agent, the listing agent, is trying to get the least expensive one. So somewhere you got to meet in the middle where you're going to get what you need. I have had that happen where I've actually said to the agent, I say, but you guys aren't fixing anything. So why are you trying to, skip on stuff? You're not fixing it. So why can't we get something that's going to give them good coverage? Naila, you have something to say? You were green, so I was just checking.
Oh, I'm not muted. That's what it is.
Oh, that's okay. You didn't have to be muted. I just was checking if you wanted to interject. Utilities not on. This actually happened to me last week, this week. I assumed because the water and lights were working, or at least the lights were on, the utilities were on. So when I realized or recognized that there's a possibility that utilities aren't on, I actually add this special step, because I don't want my due diligence to be ticking away and we can't do anything because nothing's on. So in this case that I have going on right now, the gas isn't on. So we've had to now extend due diligence twice because the gas company postponed even the date that they gave the seller. But yeah, in 24 hours after we get written notification. So again, you see it's very kind of clear. Seller will make sure all utilities, including gas, are activated at seller's expense for buyer's home inspection and appraisal. Due diligence period and appraisal contingency start 24 hours after written notification is received from listing agent to buyer's agent. So as you can see, that's very clear who's paying for it, when it's going to start, why it's needed. Don't put it on for the home inspection and turn it back off. We need it for the appraisal as well. So just very clear as to what that is, in my opinion. Y'all can tell me if you think there's some more clarity we need to add, but overall, it's very specific that there's no mincing of words in that.
I basically used that, but I like the way you worded it, to have written notice, because I don't do it as written notice. I just put it as due diligence will not start until they are confirmed on, but having it written and starting 24 hours after written notice is worded better.
And actually, I don't think I've ever gotten a written notice, but
but it's there. So if it was ever a problem, it's like, you didn't tell me in writing. So it's, you have it written that if it wasn't in writing, then
that goes in front of a judge. The judge is going to be like, well, did you email or text her? What did you do?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, you called her? Oh, she said written.
Right, exactly.
Trust me, foster care, it was very cut and dry. Yeah. So Backup offers. I personally think in this market we're in, you should be accepting backup offers as a listing agent. You should be writing backup offers as a buyer's agent, because so many things are happening to these contracts where they're not going all the way through. So when you have that backup offer, and when I say backup offer, I mean the official backup offer, there is an exhibit that you have to complete and everybody signs off on. So this isn't like, oh yeah, well, I'm gonna call you first. No, this is, you are first in line because you have a signed contract in place that identifies you to be first in line, because you have to get the current buyer's information to put into that exhibit to say, hey, Denise Edwards is the buyer of said property and you guys went under contract on March 1st, kind of thing. That's what that really says. So, and then you have to put a date when that ends. So this way you're the backup offer officially. And then I like to make sure that for clarity, we have, and there was something I saw recently in the offer I have, where they put it, oh, the earnest money. I put it in this special stip here, but the way that I received a backup offer, they used that third line for the earnest money and said 3 days, or they put the amount and 3 days after we become primary, something like that, something to that effect. So it kind of doesn't, and that's the box they check versus checking, hey, I have the check already, or hey, I'm gonna get it to you in 3 days. Because when you check that you have it in 3 days, technically, what I've gleaned from the contracts class is that you need to be getting that in 3 days, even though you're not the primary. So you need to protect that you're not committing your buyer to something before they even become the primary offer. So that's why I make sure that we're all clear. And it might be technically in the backup exhibit, but I still like additional clarity. Um, any questions about that?
Denise, real quick, because I'm looking in the chat. Francis said, what terms are you using to get that are getting accepted? Example, how long due diligence, financial contingency, closing costs, and earnest money?
I think that's a catch-22. I've been still doing 7 days for due diligence. I really just don't like the 3 or 5 days personally, but I think some people are doing that. It just really depends. I just put a cash offer in for a house. We didn't get it, and apparently that seller, his biggest concern was his highest net. So some of those other things probably don't make a difference. Did it make a difference to him in terms of that? So it's really about talking to the seller's agent, listing agent, and gleaming from them what's important to that seller and tying it to. But of course, you don't want to put 10 days, because they're probably either going to counter it if they decide to counter you and stuff like that. So I've been reeling those in some, but I've been using 7 and 14 for appraisal and financing. Of course, talking to the lender to make sure they can meet that first and foremost.
Yeah.
And then I'm literally, if I think I have a shot, I'm literally calling my home inspector while I'm writing the contract or something and saying, hey, when's your next available? Pencil me in. So I did that with one, and we literally went binding like today, and she was there tomorrow. And then the seller was like, hey, we need 24 hours. Like, you just signed up on the documents yesterday. So, and
yeah, especially if you pretty much use the same home inspector, trying to see how far out their inspections are.
And she's been backed up.
Because then you'll know.
Yep, she's been backed up. So that's why I literally call or text her now and say, hey, when can, and then sometimes I forget if the contract doesn't go through to call her back. So luckily she'll say, hey, you still need this? I think that's the other thing, to keep that respect going, is make sure you remember that you did that and contact them to kind of cancel.
To cancel it, yeah. Because I'll schedule them when I think we're going binding. Like, we're going to go binding here. Go ahead and schedule it. I'll cancel it if we don't. Then you can go off of that.
So property back on market. If I go into a house and I see from the history that it's been under contract once or twice or whatever, then I typically will ask them to send me a copy of the home inspections. I I used to not necessarily do one on my own, but I've come to realize that all home inspectors are not created equal. So, but at least it gives me gives me and my buyer some type of insight into what might be going on with the home. And I might even shoot it over to my home inspectors for them to look at. I've done that once or twice for her to kind of take a once over on it, see what she thinks. And then I might, one time that happened and we got the ATAC from the previous contract. And basically we had her go out to check that those things were already completed. So I sent her a copy of the home inspection, a copy of the ATAC. She reviewed both. And then instead of having her do a full blown inspection, we paid for her kind of to do that reassessment of what was supposed to be done to make sure those things were done. I've done another one where I did something similar to another house, and that house, ironically, my home inspector had done the original report for the first buyer. And I ended up talking to that agent because she obviously knew the agent. She looked at the ATAC and she said, if these things aren't done, and she actually talked to the agent. And so she said, if these things aren't done, then there's no need for me to go back out there. So and we had a very short due diligence. So instead of having the home inspector go, we had a foundation specialist go. I had a mold expert go. We had a pest control go. And then this house needed, it needed irrigation, not irrigation, drainage was off and I can't think of the word now. So we had that person go out to give us a quote. The structural engineer found that the brand new deck was not done to code. He ended up being out there with that crew. I can't think of the name, but anyway, they ended up being out there and agreed that, yeah, the French drains and all that stuff needed to be installed. The mold that they claimed they had done for the first buyer was not done when my mold specialist got out there. And the clear termite letter they provided, my pest guy found termites. So they weren't willing to do anything. So we came right on back out of it. So I don't even know if they sold that house because there was so much going on with it, and that the seller was not trying to do, and it was an investor. So. Escalation clause. So this is probably to the question about what is getting people some of these homes nowadays is your escalation clause. So if your client has wiggle room and is willing to, set a maximum amount, this can indeed be the difference in getting the contract. I did one last week and that's how we got the contract. And as you can see here where the yellow is, these are obviously numbers you can change. So we did $1,000 and we went up, I think, $10,000 or so from where we knew the seller wanted to be. And we ended up getting it, and it's based on the net. So we ended up getting the house. Termite letter, very important that you pay attention if you put any timing in there, because the termite letters are only good for 30 days. So, and keep in mind that if you end up having to extend closing or anything like that, and the termite letter was done, it might be invalid by the time you're ready to close. So it might have to be done again. So just keep that in mind as you write those ATACs for termite letters. And that's kind of my overview of special stipulations. Some of the most popular ones I tend to use, I categorize them. Anybody has any questions, comments, concerns, things that they're seeing they want to add, especially in this market that we're in. I know it's kind of crazy for us all out here. Is that a no?
I have a quick question, Denise.
Sure.
So I think you and Falandashay were mentioning it like right at the beginning of the call, but in this market, are you still going are you still just as detailed with your special steps, or are you kind of trying to keep it as clean as you can just to get under contract?
I am trying to keep it as clean as I can to get under contract. So normally prior to, I guess, really January is when this, in my mind, it feels like everything kind of changed. I was asking for the home warranty up front. I was asking for the termite letter up front. And that was probably the costly ads, right, that I was adding. So in this market, if it is a house that has been under warrant, under contract before, I would not hesitate in asking for the home inspection because that's no cost to them, right? If it is an investor and their utilities are on, we need the utilities on. So I would put that in there. You know, things like that I would still put in there because I feel like it is somewhat of a still a clean offer because you're not asking for something that's not needed, right?
Right.
I think it's a judgment call. If we're doing a backup offer, I would still put that in there as a backup offer because we've kind of already negotiated terms. Because that's the one thing about backup offers is that you're negotiating terms up front, and that's why you're signing off on it because these are all acceptable to you, to your client, whether you're buyer or seller, and you know both sides. And we're not in the holidays, so that would not be. That would not be applicable right now. I still would ask for the fixtures and stuff because it's not really costing them anything. It's just adding clarity. So some of these I would probably still include because it's not asking them for anything that's not already kind of there or maybe accessible to them. But I am trying to keep it as clean as possible. And I think the bigger things is asking for things that cost money in the special steps along with closing costs, right? So, and I would definitely be still asking for the HOA documents and additional disclosures if they're missing or I don't have them at the time I write the offer. Because again, there's no cost to it. So that's my take on it. But you know, there are some that are coming in without anything at all.
Right. And then what I'm noticing or I've seen is they're coming in with nothing. And then if they get the contract and they go through the due diligence, that's when they're asking for more things, especially like the home warranty, because you do the inspection. And if you see something on there, or even maybe if you don't, you're asking for the home warranty kind of now that you're already under contract.
Right. So, and that a lot of people were doing that before this market, to be honest with you. I just like to get it up front. And I really have only had one person push back on me and I pretty much asked for it on all contracts prior to January. So, you know, or if I see it's a house that's doesn't look like it has a lot of activity, like one of the houses I just recently closed, it had definitely been sitting. They had dropped the price. I did ask for all of those things. I asked for the septic to be pumped and a clear letter. I asked for the termite letter. I asked for the home warranty. And he was actually pushing back on everything. I didn't get the home warranty. The septic, he was like, well, it's a 2005 building. I said, yeah, and it's time to pump it. If it hasn't been pumped, it's time to pump it. The termite letter, I said, you know, I didn't think he would have had termites. So the termite letter I figured was what? Up to usually $75 for most companies. I've only seen one that was higher. So I can get my person out there and he can write the letter, but he ended up having termites. So my client got a full system around the house because of that. So some things that might be, you know, again, this house didn't seem to be any activity. So I asked for my typical stuff.
Was that stuff that you asked for in the offer or you asked on the ATAC?
That was on my special steps.
Yeah.
ATAC was something totally different.
Yeah, I was going to say, if those are things that you want already and you already know, I would definitely suggest putting it up front in the offer, because then when you come back in the ATAC after you've already won the offer, in this market, people are not wanting to do anything. They're like, They're going to look at the offer, the ATAC, like, you just came back, you won the offer, now you want to come back and ask for all this? No, we'll put it back on the market.
That's true. So you gotta feel it out. I don't think there's any drop dead answer to that, because again, I always tell my clients, you're dealing with 4 different people. I'm your agent, I'm one person, you are the buyer or seller, and then, you know, the other side, they got 2 different people. So what can happen on this transaction might not happen on the next transaction, even with me as being the common denominator, right? So you, in that example, but you just have to feel it out. So like I said, with that house there, they had no activity, price was dropped, so it wasn't moving. I had looked at, you know, that's probably one of the things I think in this market you have to be mindful of and take a look at, is looking at the listing history. So when you look at the listing history, then you can kind of identify, you know, potentially what your strategy is. If you can get the listing agent on the phone or get some responses from them to get some intel, you know, take all of that and synthesize it and determine what's going to be the best strategy for you to help the client win the house. And then take into account the price point, because if it's an entry price point, you know, then you're going to have a lot of competition at an entry price point. You know, if you're at that 200, 250, everybody and their mother's in that range, including the folks that can afford more because they don't want to necessarily spend more. So you have a lot of people in that entry level price point that you're competing against. I saw a post on Facebook that a house in, I think it was, matter of fact, I took a snapshot of it. It was, I don't want to lie, so I'm gonna tell y'all exactly what it said.
Denise, while you're looking that up, people are requesting for the PowerPoint in the chat.
Yeah, we do send it out. That's no problem. Home in Jonesboro, 196 offers.
Wow.
I saw that because I was trying to figure out who even let it get up to that many offers.
196 offers. So that house has to be under 200. I didn't even look up the ad, and the address is there. I didn't even look it up.
Yeah.
You know, another house here, another post I saw, house was listed at 165. This agent and their buyer offered 190, and she saw it come through as being sold for 260. So $95,000 above list price. So you just got to think about what you're, you know, where you are. Cause I just put in a offer for a house and it went, and again, my client's cash. It went for $30,000 above list price, and they guaranteed $10,000 above appraised value. There was a sub-zero refrigerator in that house, just to give you an idea. And they didn't want it. They would take it. I don't think they wanted to. And there was a lot of upgrades. So yeah. And it wasn't a cash offer, and they had several cash offers, including mine. And they had several offers over 300K, he said. But it was about that net for him.
Denise.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, this is Joe. I have a question. I kind of came in a little late, but you guys were talking about the ATAC, and it seems like I heard you saying that people don't share the ATAC with the lender and the maybe the attorneys.
Right. So and actually that's our next topic. This is why this class is an hour and a half, because we kind of merged it all together. So when I first taught this class, we had some veteran agents come into the class, and they said that they never share the ATAC with the lender and or closing attorney. So they either they don't really label it, or they label it like 0, because those should be numbers, right? So they label it 0. So, because if you label it 1 and then you end up sending number 2, then everybody's going to ask for what's number 1. So you can't bypass giving them number 1. But if you don't label it, or you have it as 0, then they're not looking for it. Because what can happen is that, and I do remember this with a deal I had a couple of years ago, the lender, because at that point I didn't know that, right? And I think that the brokers will probably tell you differently, that that's not how it's supposed to be done. So this was what they shared. I'm not saying this is what you're supposed to do, but this is what was shared to us in that class by some agents that have been in the business much longer than most of us on this call. But I do recall after they said it, I have a client that when we closed, because I didn't know that in ATAC was numbered and all that good stuff. They did want, before we could close, my client to do a walkthrough and confirm that she was satisfied with the work that was done. So, and then if you send them a copy of like the home inspection, then that could bring up concerns.
The lender wanted them to do that?
Yeah, because it's part of the contract. The amendments are part of the contract. So they saw the amendment to address concerns, and they saw the list of things that both parties agreed to have wanted done and seller will be completing. So they wanted to make sure before they sign off on this that the buyer was completely satisfied with the work that was done. Because if it's not, so if they kind of didn't do it and then we close, then there's no recourse. But if the lender puts a halt to it and say, hey, you didn't do the stuff, the buyer's not happy, they got to finish up what they're doing because it's part of the contract.
Well, I mean, I don't see how that would be inconsistent with what the buyer would want anyhow.
Right, but if the seller, it can hold up your deal.
All right.
The bottom line is that it can hold up your deal. It can actually stop the deal, right? So like if you send them the home warranty, I mean the home inspection report, and that home inspection report, I think the example earlier was something about the roof. If it says something about the roof that they're not understanding, that it's not like it needs a complete roof replacement, then the lender can say, wait a minute, this needs a new roof. How did we get insurance? Well, we need a new roof before this will close. Seller's not agreeing to put on a new roof. Now your deal is where it stopped. And I'm just using it as an example because I haven't had that happen, but that could be a real example where there's something, and the roof is usually the thing. You can't sell a house with the roof that leaks. But if there's no leak, and then now something came up that alerted them to something that might not be a big deal to the buyer or seller, and they're like, well, I'm a roofer, I can do it after closing, I'm okay. Now you stop the deal that everybody was content with what their options were.
Oh, okay, wow, so you just made another statement. You said you can't sell a house that's leaking?
Nope, not financing. You ain't gonna get insurance. And if you can't get insurance, you can't close. The insurance company's going out there to look at those houses before they write that policy. Don't think they're not. You might not be fully aware of it, but they do. Okay, so I think we have just about 30 minutes. So we're going to talk about the amendment to address concerns. So before you submit the ATAC, you want to complete all inspections. So if you are doing more than a home inspection, then you need to do all of that and then compile your findings and then, complete your ATAC. Allow the inspections to guide you and use verbiage and explanations from the reports. Don't just copy and paste what's in the report, because that's usually not, in my opinion, not sufficient, because they're just kind of identifying the issues. I would suggest using action verbs, as I have further down there. Try to organize the most important repairs by the type or contractor vendor first. So like if you have some things that that are really your buyer is strongly concerned about, then I would probably try to put that at the top of the list. In this market we're in now, you want to really stick to, if you haven't waived your inspection, if you will, that you're not going to ask for repairs because people are doing that, then definitely prioritize and make sure that you're asking for the things that are truly the things that your buyer wants. Don't nitpick, because that will, as we kind of mentioned before, that might have them saying, hey, I'll put this back on the market. I always say to, get a licensed and insured professional to do it. So I always put that in there. I don't say just, have an electrician do it. I put licensed, insured, and actually that should say bonded, and bonded professional. And then you definitely want to make sure that if it's a repair that will impact your appraisal, then you want to include that. So one of the first things that happened in mine, and the inspector wasn't my choice at the time, and this was early on when I first started real estate. Apparently for an FHA loan, if you don't know, you need to have a railing from, pretty much on stairs. I think anything over 3 stairs, you have to have some type of railing. So this particular house didn't have a railing from the basement to the main level. And so I didn't really request it because I was green, quite frankly. And it ended up costing my buyer more money because the appraiser has to go back out. So if you're not familiar with that, any repairs that the appraiser says needs to be done to kind of give the seal of, the check mark on the appraisal, they have to go back out, and that requires an additional fee. And that's usually something the buyer will have to eat. So definitely you want to include anything that is going to remotely be brought up in the appraisal, so that you don't have to subject your buyer to that. And if it's something that they're pushing back on, the seller side, you might want to say, hey, this is definitely something that's going to need to be done, most likely going to need to be done for the appraisal. So we need to get it done now. Or in me, if they push back and they don't want to do it, then I'll put it in writing that if there's another fee, they need to eat it if it comes up. I'm notorious for that. I tend to reference the page numbers. What I would say this, if you're going to give the ATAC to your lender, or your if you number the ATAC to become part of your contract, then you probably don't want to reference page numbers. I reference it for the seller to be able to easily access it. But if you're going to make it as part of your contract, you probably don't want to do it, because then you're kind of opening up to, well, what's the attachment? And then that's going to prompt them to want a copy of the home inspection report, potentially. Use action verbs. So I tend to use repair, replace, install, remove. I don't know why I put evaluated, because I really don't use that, but I use action verbs. I know somebody who put evaluated, and the person, that's just what saying evaluate, So I can evaluate it by looking at it. That doesn't mean they're going to make any repairs. So just be very, very clear about what you need to be done. You can actually include a step-by-step of what you want addressed. I did receive one like that said, hey, we want you to service the HVAC, and they listed all the things they wanted done as part of that servicing. I again strongly suggest you number them. And at the end of the amendment, I always put all parties agree that all other things stay there. I always ask for receipts and pictures within 5 days of the before closing. I also now put a commentary in there that says that we will be coming back to inspect, and or the home inspector to inspect the property. So that's kind of that in a nutshell. Where am I? Questions, comments?
I have a question.
Sure.
What type of items would, I guess, affect the appraisal? Because you said sometimes some items might affect the appraisal.
So I've only had a handful that came back with stuff that needed to be done. So I can kind of review some of the things I've personally experienced. So one, there was some dry rot wood around the windows, and actually this appraiser plucked them out to make sure. Seller was mad. The listing agent was hot that that appraiser did that. But I think the appraiser wanted to make sure they wouldn't just do something to, that wouldn't necessarily really be a true fix. Like I said, the railing between the basement and the main floor. I had one recently where for some reason they were like the expansion tank needed to be on the plumbing, but I don't know what he was doing. because that's a new code, so everything else is kind of grandfathered in. We had a chimney loose that was basically moving, so we had to get that stabilized. We had, this particular house there was some bad rain we had, and it ended up water came in underneath the door from the basement, so we had to put another seal. I think that might have been it that I can think of that I've had. So I haven't had a lot that have had appraisal issues, but that railing could have been one that could have been avoided, because the way it was presented by the home inspector, it was like, well, it could be, and he should have said, this is the problem, and this is required. And that's why, in my greenness too, I didn't realize. So there's anything safety, if there's mold or something, they'll probably bring that up, stuff like that. So your safety, health, oh, the one that we just had, there was some pipe that sticks out of the front of the house, out of the siding, and it wasn't sealed. So they had to seal that up with some foam. And then there was a retaining wall, because it's a basement house. And now the code is that for safety measures, you have to have a rail on it. So that needed to be done. But it wasn't something that came up in the inspection report, so we didn't know about it. But those type of things, if you see anything, so like I'll be on alert for some of those things now, right? But yeah. Especially FHA.
Question.
Mm-hmm.
When would you or would you not share the inspection report? Let's say if you're with the listing agent or the seller.
So as a buyer's agent, you're asking if I would share it with the listing agent? Typically I share it. If I'm doing an ATAC, I'm sharing it. And I typically share the whole report. And I don't know if that's just me being lazy or not. Because I've had one where I was a listing agent and they just shared screenshots of some of the quote unquote concerns, but they didn't share the whole report. But they also kind of canceled out of the contract. It's really, I guess, your buyer's permission whether you're sharing it or not. But honestly, I think if you're asking for repairs at a minimum, you need to share the pages or the information that relates to what you're asking for. Because you can just be nitpicking and it might not be something that came up. So you want to have that, that proof, if you will. Because I have received one where they just sent it. I'm like, well, where's the report? So you definitely, it just substantiates it. So like I don't think anybody asks about what's all inspection. So typically I do a home inspection. I do a separate termite/pest inspection. And sometimes I do a roof inspection. And I have a pest guy and a roof company, actually a couple of roofing companies that will do free inspections or go out and, do free assessments. And so this way it kind of protects it. There was a recent post about 2-3 months ago where this new homeowner put up there that they had bees in the house, and they sent the pest people out there because the house had been vacant for some time. And based on the bee person that came out there to help get rid of them, they said from the honeycomb, it's definitely a 5-year-old beehive or whatever they called it. And they had to actually cut through drywall to like get them out the house. So, and it was in the fascia, I guess that's called, up in the roof on the outside. So they were getting in the house. So it just solidified that, I'm not going to probably not have some type of pest control inspection as part of my due diligence to get somebody out there to look at it for my buyers. Another one, I saw a post on Facebook where the agent came on and said, hey, we smelled cat urine. We had them get that out of the house. And now my buyer's in the house and rats are running rampant. She turns on the oven and they were smelling rat poop up in there and stuff like that. So obviously, I don't know if the person even had cats now. I think they had the cat urine to kind of get rid of the rats. And from having a conversation on one of my other clients' homes, my pest guy told me that rats are really hard to get rid of. If you kick them out, they're trying to figure out how to get back in. So they're a really hard pest to get rid of out of your house. So she probably needs to get a cat so that they can leave her house alone, honestly. So, just make sure you're protecting as much as possible your clients. So with that said, I just had a termite inspection done and he said, we see some activity, but it doesn't look like it's new activity, but they're not going to write the letter without doing any service. So that will probably be part of our ATAC, that we want, a clear termite letter. Because and providing that receipt or that assessment from the pest control, like, hey, this is what you guys have. And actually he said he saw beetles too, or activity of past beetles. So yeah. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Somebody talk to me.
Hey, Denise.
Yes.
This is Philonda Shea.
Yes, ma'am.
Have you ever had a scenario where the buyer paid for the septic tank to be cleaned and inspected?
Always. I don't have my buyer. Oh, wait, the buyer paid for it. No, Well, let me go back. That's a great question. So I did have a house 2 years ago that my clients wanted the septic tank pumped. The agent on the other side was like, oh no, something. And my husband is, I forgot what it was, but some professional that sounded like they dealt with ground and all that other stuff. And she's like, well, if it's a company, he would use that. So I said, okay, well, here are the companies I have. What does he think about these? Because she pushed back about the seller doing it. My buyers were like, nope, they were engineers, first of all. So both of them, wife and husband. So they were both engineers, so they're scientists, stuff like that. So they want to make sure it works. So we said, okay, fine. Your seller doesn't want to pay for it. We'll pay for it and everything. No problem. Then she pushed back again. And one of the commentators, I can't remember at what phase of the whole septic tank conversation, but she said one of her concerns was that she had one where the septic tank ended up getting damaged. So she was trying to protect her client from not having that happen for her to pay for it. Understandable, because they can be, a costly expense. Howsoever, my clients are buying this house. They don't want to start out with, a septic tank full, potentially. So I sent over the termination because my clients were like, well, let's go to this house because we already had a list of houses that, pecking order if it didn't work. And so some other things that I'll just share about that. They were actually in another Atlanta partner's office, and she immediately called me, and she wasn't always that responsive. And she was like, oh, no, we'll get it done. We'll just hide it. And I said, no. I said, David Maxey says that once you send that termination, the contract is done. We got to redo the whole contract. No, we don't. I'll call him. I was like, okay, you can call him. So lo and behold, she ain't called me back. She texted me and said, yep, he said you got to redo the contract. I was like, I know. But either way, we had selected one of the vendors, her husband, who was supposed to be a specialist of some sort that knows about these things and knows some reputable companies. They were willing to go with one of those companies because they were relocating. So they didn't have any affinity to anybody in that space. So, but then she was pushing back, but she was amplifying her experiences and concerns into the situation that almost got the deal X, and they had been on the market for quite some time. And this lady was a widow, and she had already bought another house, so the house was vacant. And I guess the husband had some type of insurance on it. So she walked away with every dollar from that closing table. So money was not the issue. There was no loan to pay off.
Wow. Did y'all stay in that deal and close?
Yeah, they're living in it. Be 2 years in July.
And the buyer was able to address and pump or whatever they needed.
They pumped it. She pumped it. Because honestly, what it was is that this was her friend or best friend's mom, some friend of hers mom, and she was elderly, of course, or older. And I don't think that lady had necessarily not wanted to do it. She was just trying not to do it and thought we were going to walk away. And I think I finally told her, I was like, my clients are engineers. Like, you messing with the wrong folk. That's their thing. They're engineers by trade.
Okay. All right. Thank you for addressing that.
I had a question.
Like
when you do inspections other than just your general inspection, like say septic, or I remember like a property in like older houses like this built in the 60s, where you do things that might be a little invasive to the property. Like say if you did something else with the septic that would disrupt the landscaping or something, and you don't own that house yet, the buyer wants to do those inspections. How do you allow for that?
So are we saying, is your scenario saying that the seller has said that they didn't want to do it, so now the buyer still wants to do it?
Right.
So I think to your point of is disrupting it. First of all, if you're doing a septic, it's going to disrupt it if they don't have the top thing, right?
Right.
So that's a given. But in that scenario, for me, what I would probably do and say is I would probably write somewhere in an amendment that all parties agree, that buyers will be doing a septic inspection, blah, 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 and probably try to, be very detailed in identifying what any issues are or whatever. So that's probably what I would have to do if I think that's a concern. That's why I try not to have my buyers do it, because if something does come up or that company was not an ideal vendor, they're not, not really what, they don't care and kind of, I won't say they don't care, but let's say they do, there's some damage that happens. Then you don't want to be in a position or have your buyer in a position to pay for something that they may not have the money for, and it is not their property. So yeah, I would just be very, very, very detailed about, try to be as detailed as possible and think about all scenarios of what could happen and have everybody sign off that there's clarity to who's going to do what if something happens. But I try not to have them buy it. And you just made me think of something and I lost that train of thought because I was trying to think of which deal it was. I did have something where the buyer did do something and I can't remember what it was now.
Because I had two. One was with the septic, being concerned with the landscaping. They did end up getting that done. And then the other one was like for the older properties, being concerned with like cast iron piping, where they had to like lift the toilet off of the floor. I just suggested they don't do it because they didn't own the property, but they did do the cameras.
Well, I don't know if I would have told them that because cast iron is a big deal if it's an older property.
Well, yeah, I don't remember the details of it, but they were able to determine like the cast iron was replaced, but I don't remember exactly what that was. It was something else, but they had to lift the toilet off the floor. They ended up not getting that property and moving on to something else.
Got it. So I think I remember what it was. So I had a couple of different properties actually with plumbing concerns. Two of them were older, one of them was newer. And I ironically, the buyer had the plumber come out and we didn't understand what they were going to do, but they scoped it. So the buyer paid for scoping. And that was like in January. And that's not a cheap, process. That's about $400 or $500, I think. So they scoped the property and came up with what the concern was with the plumbing that was semi-identified in the home inspection, right? We did eventually give them some closing costs to deal with it after they closed, which they were amenable to. Another one we had where the house was actually renovated. So the buyers that the owners that were in it now had bought it when it was renovated. It was a huge lot. So there was a lot of pipe from the house to the street. And the concern was that I think it could have been that cast iron or whatever that plumbing is from back then. And we didn't even move forward with it because we didn't think they were going to scope it. This past week, my home inspector went out, and this is one of the ones with the utility off. So the gas was off, but she had done some, preliminary findings, if you will, walking around, and she saw that there could be some plumbing issues. And the agent I'm dealing with actually uses her too. So she called her directly. I told her to call her. The seller is working on getting the plumbing issues rectified and scoped it and all that other stuff. So there were some issues. So we lucked up on that one because my buyer definitely doesn't have those extra resources for that. And it probably would have been something we would have walked away. So I'm glad that the seller is doing it. So it's just, you have to figure out, who has the resource. Well, if it's your buyer, if they have the resources to do it, to get it fixed if it needs to be fixed after closing, all those things I think come into play to see if you're going to move forward. But I would try to be, if they're concerned about landscaping, that's not a bigger thing than the plumbing and the septic tank working, in my opinion. So I get it. Howsoever, you mean you've never pumped it because you're concerned about landscaping? That in and of itself is quite interesting to me. So
thank you.
No problem. You're welcome. So these are the things that have to happen in an ATAC to me. Who's going to address the concerns? What specifically are the concerns? What's the time frame that you want them to be addressed? And what happens if they're not completed? So I usually have an opening statement, a closing statement, and then I had one or two that was close to when due diligence was ending. So this is actually a GAR special stip that basically says if we don't come to an agreement by, this time frame or extended, then basically, this is kind of it ends. You're terminating the contract if we can't come to an agreement within that time frame. So kind of like, hey, due diligence ends tomorrow, you're sending it off tonight, or you're sending it off in the morning and it ends at night, but you don't have resolution. So you're really right up against the wall in terms of your timing, but you don't want your client to be stuck with the house or those repairs, kind of like what happened with mine, where that lady missed her due diligence. So you just kind of want to make sure the name of the game is you got to protect your client. So, and, assessing where, not that anybody has any money to lose, but, if it's truly somebody that's pulling their coins together to get their house, you want to preserve as much of that as possible, right? Or be willing to pay their earnest money or something if you mess up. So with that said, you want to try to leave at least 24 to 48 hours at the end of the inspection period, if not more time to negotiate the repairs. If you're attaching the amendments, not amendments, but inspection reports, and you want to check that box. And I have now gone through where I typically do our walkthrough 2 or 3 days before closing. Probably more like 5 now. I try to do it. I put 5, I think, in the commentary. And lately, because of some of the repairs that needs to be done, my home inspector has gone back out. She usually charges us a small, like, if they want to report, I think it's $150. If they just want her to come and check what was done, it's like $75. But I usually have her come out just so we can make sure that everything is done and done right. And we have, in doing that, I found different things that have not been done correctly. So it has helped to go back within like 5 days or so that it can still be addressed and be able to close on time. And then, like, for example, if the seller says, I'm not doing these things, then you might want to get quotes. So you might want to even extend your due diligence to get quotes to make sure it's something your client wants to move forward with. I had a deal a few years ago where first-time home buyers, house was being sold as is, lots of issues because of water, starting with gutters were totally deteriorated, siding was damaged, termites, what else? Mold. So quite a few things which all stem from the water. So what we did was we were able to get the home inspection done relatively early. So my suggestion before we walked away, potentially walked away, was let's get some quotes. So you have a baseline to know what the costs are and if those are things you can do, because not everything needed to be done immediately. And then we identified that the first thing that needed to be done were the gutters, because if you fix all the other things and didn't fix the gutters, you were going to recreate the problem. So we identified that the gutters had to be done first. And then, making sure that those things were something that they could truly afford to do at some point or another. And the HVAC was end of life. So they did the gutters. They ended up getting a new HVAC system from the home warranty. The seller was already working on the termite problem, and the seller was replacing the roof. So we ended up really in a good place, and they're still there. And so the attorney would need it if you need to execute. Well, they really don't need that. But let's say there's going to be some work done and the vendor has decided that they're going to, they're willing to take the funds at closing. Then you would need to make sure that the invoices are sent to the closing attorney. You may need to put some monies in escrows to get it done. Most recently, we identified some issues that definitely would have exceeded our closing cost budget for the type of loan of 3%. So what we did was there was two main things that needed to get done. We took one of them, we took the funds for that as closing cost. The second one, we did we sent the invoice and had that separated into two checks directly to the vendor. So this way the buyer, when she engaged the vendor, she would be able to have half of the funds to give them for the deposit. And then when the work was completed, she got the other 50%, she would be able to give them the 50% check. So it came out of the seller's proceeds. And so that was an amendment. I didn't put it on the ATEC, but that was on an amendment that how I wanted it outlined. I confirmed with the vendor if they needed a deposit and how much and those type of things. And then we kind of capped it. So I wrote it saying, because they wanted to explore other vendors. So I told them that it had to be a maximum of 5,000. So I kind of, to my earlier stuff, I was kind of really clear. I kind of thought through it and tried to make sure it was as clear as possible, that there was no stipulation. So when we left the closing table, they got two checks for that vendor and started getting the work done. And we talked about some of these already in terms of like, if you are going to give the ATAC, you probably don't want to include the reports. So yeah, and like I said, legally, we probably should be providing it. It's your call how you want to do that. We've kind of talked about that a lot, and we're being recorded. So I'm not trying to get in trouble with the brokers. If you're going to get compensation and closing costs in lieu of repairs, first of all, do not put in lieu of repairs, because then that identifies to the lender that there are issues. So you just want to say that you want additional closing costs, and for clarity, you want to, give them a total, because if you've already negotiated on the front end closing costs, you don't want them to think that it is that replaces that amount. You want them to know that it's in addition, if that's the case. If you want compensation and repairs and you use the ATAC, and I think an example I gave earlier, I used an ATAC and an amendment. So the amendment can go to the appropriate parties to get included in the closing documents. And if you're requesting a price reduction, which could be based off of quotes. and then you could escrow. So I did an escrow the other day where they had items still left on the property, and we did an escrow to make sure that they would get it, to not hold up closing. We made sure that we did an escrow of funds from the seller's proceeds, and we made it hurt so that they would get it done, and then they would get it released. But I think there might be lender not issues, but the lender might need to know about some of those things depending on what it is. So in your contracts period, not just your ATAC, I was always taught not to leave anything blank. I mean, obviously, if you don't know the seller, or if it's like I have one where the person is signing, but it looks like from the deed that it's a company. So I kind of left it blank for the other side to fill in, but I try not to leave anything blank on any document. And I think we're kind of close to end of time, or right over. So these are just some examples that you guys can look through. You can reach out if you have any questions. This one here, I will review this. This was actually one of my deals. And, you know, we asked them to replace the garage door opener and the light wasn't functioning. And they literally put the cord through the socket, and then the light wouldn't be able to work. So that became a big contention because that was stupidity to me. And I had to, you know, get with the agent. I said, you guys wouldn't do this to your own house. So why do you think this is acceptable? I said, this isn't even up to code. So yeah, we had some big conversations over this little bitty socket because they did crazy stuff, in my opinion. Okay, any last minute questions? I know I've gone over time. I can stay on to answer any questions. So if you need to jump off, feel free. Totally your call, but hello? Is Nicole still here? Because I know she got a lot of questions. If you're talking, Joe, I can't hear you. Joe, I can't hear you.